Welcome back to a day-long meta dialogues on compelling discussions across a vast theme of the theatre world. Hope you enjoyed our previous two meta dialogue sessions, The Show Must Go On, and Strategies for Cultural Venues. In case you missed any of these, they are available to watch on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. The Mahindra Group has always been committed deeply to the arts. The arts need to be nourished and nurtured, as in art lies truth, conviction, talent, and wisdom. Businesses need to help the arts flourish and find innovative ways in doing so, especially at a constantly changing world that we inhabit today. A very warm welcome once again to this meta dialogue at the Meta 2021. Today's conversation: Translations for Theatre. Jayashree Joshi, Mahesh Dattani, Maya Pandit, Naveen Kishore, and Subhendu Sarkar. Moderated by Deepa Punjani. India has a rich theatre heritage with Kerala's Koodiyattam tradition and Kalidasa's Abhigyan Shakuntalam and Bhavabhuti's Uttararamacharita dating back to the 5th and 8th centuries. But were it not for translations, many great and wonderful plays would not have had the chance and appeal that they have had in the country and abroad. Translating is a unique exercise, but the act of translation for theatre is even more special. Join us for a deep dive into translations for theatre with our 5 panelists, Jayashree Joshi, Mahesh Dattani, Maya Pandit, Naveen Kishore, and Subhendu Sarkar, as they enliven the subject with their first-hand experiences and specialized knowledge in this field. The conversation will be moderated by Deepa Punjani. Introducing to you our panelists for today. Naveen Kishore established Seagull Books in 1982 as a publishing program in the arts and media focusing on drama, film, art, and culture studies. Today, it also publishes literature, including poetry and serious fiction, and owns the worldwide English language publishing rights for books by Paul Sheelan, Ingeborg Bachmann, Jean-Paul Sartre, Thomas Bernard, Imre Curtis, Ish Bonnefoy, Mo Yan, Mahashweta Devi, Peter Handke, among others. He is also a recipient of the Coit Medal and the Chevalier Ordre des Arts des Lettres. Jayashree Joshi is a published poetess, translator, and theatre critic. She is skilled in various languages such as Sanskrit, German, Marathi, Hindi, and English. Jayashree has been working with the Coit Institute, Max Muller Bhavan, Mumbai, for more than 2 decades. She has translated and published several plays, articles, essays, children's literature and poetry into Hindi, Marathi, English, and German. She has coordinated an expansive poetry translation project, Poets Translating Poets, and translated 2 original Turkish novels into Marathi. Subhendu Sarkar is an associate professor of English at Ranaghat College in West Bengal and has lectured at various institutes of higher learning. He has extensively researched Badal Sarkar's theatre and has translated 2 of his plays into English, which have been published by Oxford University Press. Subhendu has also worked on translation studies and published theoretical articles in books and journals that include articles in Berlo Brecht's theatre, Marxism, Bengali theatre, Bengali 19th century liberalism, modern Indian history, among other subjects. Maya Pandit is a poet, translator, teacher, developer, and an activist who has been involved with the women's movement in India and alternative theatre movement in Maharashtra for the last 3 decades. An accomplished translator, she works with Marathi and English and has translated several plays, autobiographies, and fictional narratives across the 2 languages. Mahesh Dattani is a renowned playwright, stage director, and filmmaker. He is known for his plays like Dance Like a Man, Tara, Final Solutions, Where Did I Leave My Parda, Gohar, and Snapshots of a Fervid Sunrise. He is also a Sahitya Academy awardee. He is the co-founder and artistic director of Playpen Performing Arts Trust, Mumbai, a group committed to developing and producing new works of drama. He has recently completed writing a sequel to his acclaimed play Dance Like a Man, which he hopes to direct this year when conditions allow. And Deepa Punjani. Deepa Punjani has been engaged with theatre and theatre criticism since several years. Her MPhil thesis 2005 studied the work of select Indian women theatre practitioners in the context of feminism and gender representation on the Indian stage. Deepa is also a lawyer and a legal journalist. In her latter role, she is keenly interested in the dialogues between the judiciary and civil society, and in the intersections between law, politics, and culture. This conversation will be followed by a Q&A. Please feel free to send in your questions. Do follow our social media pages and stay tuned to our website, metawards.com, for updates on our upcoming program. Ladies and gentlemen, presenting to you Translations for Theatre, Jayashree Joshi, Mahesh Dattani, Maya Pandit, Naveen Kishore, and Subhendu Sarkar, moderated by Deepa Punjani. Deepa, over to you.
Thank you, Judith. Hello, everybody. Well, we have with us today a group of people, all closely connected with theatre and translation. And I'm glad that they have been able to join us for this conversation in spite of the terrible times that are upon us. Shamik Bandyopadhyay, who was supposed to be our keynote speaker, has been unable to join us as planned because of vaccine-related sickness, and we wish him well. So Naveen Kishore of Seagull Books has been kind enough to take his place at short notice. And as Judith has already introduced our other speakers, Jayashree Joshi, Subhendu Sarkar, Maya Pandit, and Mahesh Dattani. I welcome all of you. Now, each of these speakers will speak for around 10 minutes before we get into a discussion. And as time permits, we'll be taking questions from the viewers. Judith has already mentioned about Seagull Books. And let me tell you, for those of you who may not know about Seagull Books, it's a niche publishing house that publishes beautiful books. And Naveen has also been part of other initiatives that he runs as part of the Seagull's Arts Foundation. And these initiatives include projects on history and on peace, which I think are extremely relevant for our time and very, very important. Naveen will be talking about his experience as a publisher and of the significant plays that Seagull has produced and why these translations have been very important for our theatre landscape. So on that note, Naveen, I invite you.
Thank you, Deepa. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, even though, as Deepa said, these are very dark times and we are all preoccupied with what is happening around us and us. Now the circles are narrowing. It's also a time when we need to reiterate as far as possible this business of listening to others, translation as the means of listening to others through language, through what is going on, through links. And without much ado, I will go back to 1982, or just a little before 1982, when, as a theatre person, because before my publishing avatar, I was designing theatre lighting for a living. And it was a desire to document all the activity in the arts around us. Theatre, film, it was a very exciting time. There was a lot of film, acting, theatre happening in the sense that you had the Rays and the Benegals, Mrinal Sens at one level, and you had the Bal Sarkars, Utpal Dutts, the Vijay Tendulkars, the Mahesh. There was a lot of language theatre happening, but there was no effort to document or publish this, because publishing translations, and nothing has drastically changed in these 39 years, was never seen as a commercially viable activity, right? You had Oxford University Press, and because they were lucky to have in Shamik Banerjee, Shamik Bandyopadhyay, a editor who was also a theatre scholar amongst many other things, they sort of, within quotes, allowed him to do 1 or 2 plays a year as part of their new drama series, right? So Eva Vindajit got done in a certain way. Tughlaq got done because there was a Girish Karnad connection with OUP. But the focus for publishing houses that size was always other books that fed their 300-400 colleagues, because you couldn't live off selling theatre, so they sold other things, textbooks and so on and so forth. For us, the pivotal moment, and I will jump a little bit here, when Shamik Da, who was the founding editor for Seagull Books, and who started this new Indian playwright series that we then began in 82, 83, his understanding was that if a small setup of 2-3 people with very little overheads decided to publish in the arts, perhaps they could make it work, because they didn't need to feed a staff of 200, 300 or 400 people. And literally, I had no experience, of course, but which was a good thing, because I also have no sense of scale. I still don't. And to me, it's just a question of logistics. You have to find money somehow. You have to publish. And we turn to people around us. We turn to Badal Sarkar, Mrinal Sen, Richard Schechner, who was a theatre friend who used to visit India in those days, traveling his mother courage and so on and so forth. And we began instinctively translation, not because we thought that, you know, Jayashree and Mahesh and Maya and Subhendu were going to jump around doing plays in English. No. But because we saw that the reality of English as a linked language, that was the only impulse at that moment. A, that we had to do translations because we needed to understand, we needed to go back to rich material that was not in our languages, either in Calcutta or in Bombay or Delhi, whatever. So English was always only used as a link language so that people could read, get excited and go. So you would read it in English, but then you would go to the original Marathi, or you would read in English and go to the original Malayalam or Bengali. And that in a nutshell was how we began. At that point, there was no sort of, you know, sense of what would happen 20 years later or 15 years later or 30 years later, because it takes that kind of time for a corpus of these books to start to become texts, because now a lot of these are texts in university and colleges and so on and so forth, right? You could say that it wasn't something we thought through it was just a retrospective methodology that emerged because there was need for it. And the irony is there is still not too many publishers translating theatre, right? That's the other thing. Now, it's a different story that for various political reasons, we decided that we would move beyond the Indian languages, and now we publish for the world. So you're translating from, you know, every single Arab language to the African to the French. It's a different thing. But theatre has remained in its sort of as a focal interest for us. And there was a spell for 10 years where we failed to continue to do Indian theatre scripts in different languages because we were too busy trying to play first world publisher, which in retrospect was also needed. But, you know, you were juggling the same pot of money, as it were. Now, you have to also remember that the irony is that some of these things which we did then are still in print, right? Irony not because they were all reprinted, though a lot were constantly. Some are still in first editions because in those days we didn't know how many to print. So we would print 5,000 thinking everybody's going to want, nobody's published plays, you know, so but of course, the reality was that you were selling in the 50s and 100s and 200s and It takes a long time. But when it became like a backlist of 30, 40 titles, it's like a corpus of, it sells across those languages, 2 copies, 3 copies, and it makes it viable gradually. And I'm sticking here to the publishing side of it, not necessarily the politics of translation constantly, though that is also inherent in the Seagull project, which is that your choice of what you did, or the kind of, what shall I say, it's like giving voice to something that at that moment may not have existed in this particular language, and using it as a link to then disseminate into other languages. So with that, I shall pass it back to Deepa as a brief introduction. If there's any more discussion and questions, happy to help. Deepa.
Thanks, Naveen. When we move into our discussion, we will talk about what were the motivations to publish some of the work that was published, and why has theatre not found many publishers. So we'll come to that. In the meanwhile, our next speaker, Mrs. Jayashree Joshi, again introduced by Judith, but two relevant things must be spoken about her translation work. Among them are her translations of the German poet Ulrich Glasner, and this has been done with Aruna Dere. Am I correct, Jayashree? Yes. And she's also translated Ramu Ramanathan's play Teen Sakina Manzil, which was actually produced by a theatre group in Kolhapur, Dr. Sharad Budadia's group.
Yeah.
And Jayashree has immense experience with translations, whether it is poetry, and now she's also currently, among the other things that she's doing, is she is overseeing a very, very important translation project of the theatre, which I hope that she will speak about, as well as refer to her own experience of translating Ramu's play.
Yeah.
Yes, Jayashree.
Yeah, thank you, Deepa. So my first experience of translation was actually from Marathi into German. Though I translated from various languages into various languages, the first was Shantata Kot Chalu Ahe from Marathi into German. And of course, I co-translated it with a native speaker. And that's when I realized that one should have a second person in the process of translation. How and when to involve him or her, that is, of course, that depends on the text that you have in front of you. Then it could be a playwright, the living playwright if you are working with the playwright directly, or another experienced translator who can listen to the Samhita or the prepared text and reflect upon it. If all that is not possible, then at least the language expert, language and literature expert from that particular foreign language. So I would very much recommend that from my experience. Then at its most basic, the job to translate a play and present it to an audience in their language, that is a given. That is what a theatre translator should do. But is it theatre, translations for theatre, translation in theatre, translating for theatre as a process? All these word plays are possible in the title given or chosen by you for this panel. That's what I thought. Then the second part of the translator is to translate the experience of the play. Because the theatre translator understands the core of what is being expressed directly and indirectly in one language and culture, and tries to find a new and linguistically appropriate way to express this in another language and culture. So theatre translator is not just a resource. I would like to say they are halfway there as playwrights, and or at least somewhere in between, because they are also scouts or de facto agents, dramaturgs, interpreters, researchers, facilitators, educators, editors. I mean, all these roles into one. So I would say that the theatre translator also is a creative voice as part of the collective dramaturgy with the playwright, director, and actors. So that is the first proposition. Now, I would like to speak about my experience of translating three Sakina Manzil, because while translating this play, I realized that you have to be a very good and thorough reader of a play in case it is from your culture, it is there, but it is still a little distant culturally because of the language and the language and the tonality of the language that plays an important role in this kind of translation. Now, briefly about Three Sakina Manzil and my connection points with this play. It is a play that celebrates the city of Mumbai, that is anonymous to the rest of the world. I mean, you and I know that this is the city of Bombay that he's talking about, but we are looking at a wide audience all over the world. So then second point is that it looks like a simple structure at first glance when you read the play, but it is a massive fresco. It has streets and lanes. It has characters, it has episodes. So the play gives you a sense of wandering around in those gullies and alleys and overhearing multiple conversations, because Mumbai or Bombay is, that this city speaks aloud. All these street vagabonds are there, and street sellers are there, and also the even bus conductors. So there's always some kind of conversation, and yet there are two characters who are sort of revealing or unfolding this city in front of you through their conversation. And then third point is the tragedy of 14th April 1944 dock explosion, and the impact of that explosion on the lives of thousands in Bombay, the then Bombay, now Mumbai. So the job of a translator was to manage these 3 points in the retelling and maintaining the flavor of that language. I always remember when I wrote the first, when I translate a play, generally I create the first literal translation draft. What speaks to you from that play? What appeals to you, or which voices do you hear? Then I try to connect to the experience of the play and the core essential narrative, the images, the landscape, the atmosphere. So try to find a language for the play, a language intended to convey what I experience as the location or climate of the original, which was easy for me this time, but geographically as well as mentally and artistically. So that would demand major changes in the draft, and that's when I generally contact the playwright. And it was I had the fortune of interacting with Ramu at multiple stages. So when I confronted the play, this city has been turned into the play. The play represents district and streets and lanes into characters. The characters, they have a personality which are unique and different from each other, plus summoning up the human characters, human figures, situation, etc. So this reality of the enormous tragedy that transpired on 14th April 1944, the Bombay dock, the explosion, dock explosion, it is interestingly kept off stage. It is always referred to. It is never in the midst of things. The characters always speak about this. So this provides for a dramatic, interesting dramatic contrast. But the translator has to be a good reader. I'm talking about that. And the choice of people that appear in this play are the individuals on the fringes of society. So that is why this explosion has a sense of murky conspiracy that has spread its tentacles everywhere, even though 60% of the play, it is not mentioned, referred, but it is beneath all that half serious, half playful obsessions. And when it appears, it emerges in a brutal way. So everything is almost a kind of distant, almost decorative, ceremonial requiem mass. Secondly, this whole thing about the so-called, or why not so-called, the real romance in this play, how it is approached. Very interesting. Again, the specifics of it. One is the language that is used by these two characters, Comrade Shashi and Shashiji, and an ideology that permeates, something that conditions every thought, word, deed, and also the streets that they inhabit. Then the city, as I said, forms a crucial backdrop. And again, this romance between these two is never spoken, but it proliferates against the backdrop of the city life. And there are portraits of very typical characters, and Dala, Seth, and Yusuf Bhai, if you have read the play. And the actual dialogue spoken between two lovers is very little, but there is a specific register that the playwright uses for that. Then there is a register of other kind of languages. That is, there are no rhetorical emphasis, but there is this descriptive underneath. They speak what the others, I mean, one person speaks what the other person does not hear, but the audience hears it. We, the audience. So it becomes important, how do you produce that intonation of these voices? So one of the things that the playwright shared with me during the discussion was that this is the city that speaks aloud, and we spoke about it. So one has to be keenly aware when you are juxtaposing the exterior scenes and the interior scenes to get a certain kind of language tonality, the prose bits, the non-prose bits, the dialogue, the spoken and the unspoken. So above all, this is the vision of the city as a living organism. And third, the actual content, the dock explosion, it is constructed as a modern day mythology, I feel. Drama of a couple who are perfect and almost at the height of the sublime. But in their interaction, we see something corroding away. So there is this eloquence of this woman and slightly more bureaucratic labyrinth kind of utterances from the man. Against all this, the dock explosion itself. So first time when I read it, I felt that the plot is in a way petering out. But beneath all this deceptive simplicity, you find a poetic tribute to this monstrous event. And I would like to conclude with my impression about Balzac or Roland Schimmelfennig, French and German theater, the playwrights. And about, so there are a few things that reflect with Sakina Manzil when I look at it as a translator. This city that is something bristling with mystery, and the fact that you have to be constantly alert and constantly curious, the scripts and the characters and events, they immerse themselves in a tangle of things, and many things happen, and that is all beneath the simplicity of it. So as a translator, you are trying to sniff out and dismantle this entire machinery bit by bit. Descriptions are something that one needs to highlight, and these are just the descriptions. These are not just the descriptions. They are conclusions, observations, debates, and tricks to this whole mystery of explosion, why it happened. Mumbai as a city that has been overpopulated. And one of the beautiful things that transpires with Three Sakina Manzil is that the silence of anonymity is brought to life. And an event which transpired, that is this explosion almost 75 years ago now, is brought to life. So the translator tries to conjure up of these images and celebrate them in a manner of speaking. So as I said, if you confront this kind of a text, there are two ways to deal with it. A simple translation, literally, or you look at the large fresco, people, city, characters, beauty, which was hitherto anonymous, but then they gain shape and come alive. So how much time do I have?
Judith?
Hello?
Judith, anybody from Meta to just let Jayashree know how much time she has?
I'll continue until they say.
You have a minute or so, Jayashree. Just go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So as I said, plays in translation are important to bring to life the differences and similarities between cultures, to show us that there are people on the other side of the globe with dreams, thoughts, and preoccupations that match our own, and also to illuminate cultural differences which are not necessarily the way we expect them to be. With this proposition, I would like to introduce briefly our project, Theater in Übersetzung, that is Theater in Translation, that is a regional project of the South Asia Goethe Institute network. And we are translating the contemporary German plays in South Asian languages. There are 6 South Asian languages, Bangla, Hindi, Marathi, Sinhalese, Tamil, and Urdu. We have selected around 22 plays. There are 26 translators for all these languages together, and there are 46 translations that are ready now. Our mentors were Dr. Barbara Chris, the theater expert, a translation expert from Germany, and the author Roland Schimmelfennig, who was our focus author for this project and other plays. And creative consultants and mentors are Ramu Ramnathan and Sunil Shanbag. So the project has entered the second phase now. They will be reading the translations, commenting upon them, and then the theater experts from each language will hand these translations to the upcoming theater groups. And I'm sure that we will have a wonderful experience engaging with the contemporary German theater. And on that note, I would stop here and we'll get into discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayashree. I think this is wonderful. And when we were having a conversation, when you mentioned this project to me, I also said that it'd be nice to actually see if, this could go ahead and some of these works could actually see the light of production.
Yeah.
So we'll come to that. Let me go on to our third speaker, Mr. Subhendu Sarkar. Mr. Subhendu Sarkar has published two of Badal Sarkar's plays, and he's also worked extensively on his other plays. As Judith said, his work has been published on translation studies. He's a scholar of translation studies. So I'm hoping that Subhendu in his talk will talk about his experience, of course, of translating Badal Sarkar and what does it mean to be a scholar of translations. Subhendu, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, everyone.
Thank you.
At the outset, I would like to thank Meta for giving this opportunity to me to speak about some of my thoughts on translation on this online platform. Now, mostly I would speak about a certain aspect of translation studies, which needs to be explored further. In fact, this has come to my mind quite recently. You see, though we have been hearing about this solve-all theory of that has been continuing since the Roman age, from Cicero onwards, that we should opt for tense persons translation. We should achieve what they say is equivalent effect. But let us all admit that this theory, however it might seem to be solving all the problems, remains a limited one. In fact, all practicing translators feel that there are so many problems that crop up during the practice of translation. And it is through negotiating these problems, addressing them in their own ways, and talking about them, theorizing them, would ultimately enrich the relatively new discipline of translation studies. So today I would like to speak about an issue that relates to translating for theatre. You see, I feel that there are three distinct categories as regards translating for theatre, out of which two have been relatively unexplored. So we will speak of them first. The first category is what happens when a playwright translates his or her own work. Should we judge it by the standards that we judge any other translator's work? In fact, I'm reminded of two examples which I would cite. First, Michael Madhusudhan Dutt's Sharmishtha. In fact, this was the first play, Bengali play, that was written keeping an eye on the stage. So it was produced in the year 1859, and all these at Belgachia Natyashala, and all these British East India Company officials, they were invited to watch the play. Naturally, the question arose, how would they understand a play which was being performed in a language that they are unfamiliar with? And remember, Sharmishtha is based on an episode from the Mahabharata, replete with highly Sanskritized Bengali words. So to solve this issue, Michael Madhusudhan Dutt prepared an English translation, which was handed over to these guests for their convenience. Now, afterwards, and here the problem arises, this translated version found its way into his complete works, among his English works, as an autonomous play. Now, once I had this opportunity to study, make a comparative study of these two plays, and to my surprise, I found there are so many differences between the original version and the translated version. There were episodes that were, altogether left out, chopped off, new dialogues were inserted. There were many sections that were compressed to a significant degree. Now, how would we judge this? Of course, we would admit that this was his play and he had every liberty or freedom or license, whatever you say, to do with his own work. So you see, what might have been considered, would have been considered sort of aberration for a translator, whom would we would criticize for taking so much liberties, would pass with approbation for the playwright. Another such example I would like to cite. It is related to Rabindranath. We all know that, if I'm not mistaken, it was from 1912 that he started seriously translating his works, and in the wake of his receiving Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913, that there was this increasing demand in England and America for his works. So Tagore himself translated, supervised his associates, his relatives' works to meet this new demand, to cater to this demand of the market, as it were. Now again, we find that these translations, all of them have serious drawbacks. Even Rabindranath accepted them on many occasions. He would write about these, shortcomings, limitations. There were again compressions, paraphrasing, use of archaism, etc. But that did not hold the project. Now, both in case of Michael Madhusudan Datta and Rabindranath, one thing we must keep in mind: what was the purpose of their translation? It was mainly to make people read. That's why all these were published. There was a remote possibility of playing them on the stage, performing them. In case of Madhusudan Datta, it was out of the question. And in case of Tagore, we all know that he was considered to be, too much of a mystique. And therefore, his plays were considered unplayable, with the only exception being The Post Office, which yet is considered to be playable. It had that element, according to him. So this is one category that we should keep in mind. Now, this category has been rightly called transcreation. What I would like to suggest is this is one extreme form of translation. Another extreme form of translation is when a person directly related to theater, preferably a director, when he or she takes up a play with this purpose of performing this to his audience, in front of his audience. Now there also we find he takes too much liberties, too many of them. In fact, if he chooses or she chooses a non-Indian play, then even the locale might be changed, the characters might be changed, the names of them, even the purport of the whole play might get changed. The whole thing would be then Indianized, because that would help both the group as well as the audience to appreciate the play. Now, as it was in the first case, the purpose was to make people read. In this case, the purpose is to make people watch. Of course, sometimes we know that some of these adapted plays were published only if they turned out to be landmarks, landmark productions in theater history. We might take some examples, say Shambhu Mitra's production, adaptation of Ibsen's Doll's House, Putul Khala, then Utpal Dutt's adaptation of Brecht's Mother Courage as Himmat Bai. So there are such examples when they reach such a level that they eventually get published. Otherwise, in most cases, these texts do not get published. They remain in the typescript form or the manuscript form. Now I come to the third category, which is the translation proper. Now, who is the translator here? Of course, people like us who are academics or theatre researchers. Now, let us admit, you see, that we work in an area which is nebulous, which do overlap with the other two extreme categories that we discussed. Sometimes all of us transcreate and again, even adapt. But there is a limit. We do not have the license or the liberty as that of a playwright or that of a director. Now, there are various issues that we should keep in mind. Whom are we translating for? Are we translating for, the Indians, or are we targeting the foreign readers? Because this is a vital question, because that would influence, the methodology involved in the translation. Now, if we are translating for the Indians, many culture-specific words, issues, etc., might not need, to be explained in the footnote or glossary. But that is not the case if we are targeting the foreign readers. Now, again, what is the purpose of our translation? It is primarily meant to be read. Of course, we keep an eye on playability as well. We would all love our translated works to be performed somewhere. Even we would walk miles to watch them performed. But still, mainly we translate for a wider readership. Therefore, we have introduction, therefore we have preface and all of that stuff. So this is a vital question. Now, the second question is, if we are translating for the foreigners, not Indians, then of course, all these things have to be explained properly. Exact or nearly exact English equivalents have to be found out. There remains this additional question of playability. Now, if we had translated it for the Indian readers, would it be playable on a foreign stage? Of course, no. And even if it is taken up for the foreign stage, many alterations would have to be made by the director to suit his or her purpose. So, all these things we need to take into consideration while translating. Another thing that I would like to, mention that this fear, this category, or rather all these categories are not like watertight compartments. They do overlap. So therefore, I'm reminded of King Alfred. All English literature student has to read King Alfred's translation in their undergraduate classes, who, we seem to forget these wise men who had said that sometimes you have to translate word for word, sometimes sense for sense. So there should be no fixed model for translation. So all I want to say is that this has to be decided by the translator. All the issues and the challenges that crop up, have to be resolved by the translator himself or herself. Translation theory can only provide us with a guideline. It can, as it happens nowadays when we refer to Google Map, it can show you the correct route, but it is the translator who has to travel the very path with all the love and care for the job. One has to bear one's own cross. So that's it. This is all I wanted to share with you all. So thank you very much for the time.
Thanks, Subhendu. Yes, translators are constantly making choices, and there are also motivations why the translator would prefer to translate or would want to translate. I mean, when it comes to the context of theatre, of course, there is, that debate is whether the play should only be read or whether the play should be staged. Ideally, theatre being a live medium, one would think that if it is adapted to the stage, then it would probably get a newer lease of life. And in fact, our own examples prove that a lot of our plays, which we consider as our landmark plays, they kind of became pan-Indian because of the translations that were possible. Whether we talk about the famous modern Indian playwrights like Tendulkar, Kannad, Alekar. So that's one aspect of it, and also. We get into the discussion when we do, it's also about hierarchy of languages. And that's a thing to actually be very, very aware of and sensitive to in our context, as well as author celebrity, why certain plays, do get translated. And to come back to the question that you raised about whether you're translating for the foreign reader or the Indian reader, that question, I think, also requires a deeper self-examination as well. But let's hope that we'll be able to tackle these in our discussion. In the meanwhile, I'd like to now invite Maya Pandit. Maya Pandit has she's done several important translations of various plays that include Jayant Pawar's Adhantar, again Ram Ramanathan's famous play Mahadev Bhai. She's translated Gopu Deshpande's Chanakya Vishnugupta, and more crucially for this particular session, and which I am very, very interested in hearing from Maya, is about her translations of Dalit plays. So Maya, let's hear from you.
Thank you very much. Am I audible?
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, there are quite a few points which I would like to make with respect to translation of theatre texts. And a very interesting point that was made was, whether you're translating for foreign readers or spectators or Indian. Now, I personally think that, that becomes too sort of generalized division, because even within Indian theatre, if you're doing it for Indian theatres, there are multiple traditions of Indian theatre too. And people who see Indian plays, I mean, you don't have, every region has its own specificity, its own theatre culture, its own theatre language, the whole traditions of acting, presentation, music that goes along with it. It's a conglomerate of various different systems. Now, my problem when I translate, for instance, two kinds of plays I've done. One is plays like Chanakya Vishnugupta and Ramu Ramanathan. Chanakya I translated from Marathi into English, and Ramu Ramanathan I translated from English into Marathi. And I had actually no problems, because, there were small problems here and there about things. But on the whole, the translation process was quite a smooth process, because the kind of, and I am a theatre person basically. I belong to Sharad Bhutadia's group called Pratyay, who staged his Ramu Ramanathan's play also, Mahadev Bhai. But my problem comes when I start translating and talking about the Dalit theatre, because Dalit theatre doesn't have a pan-Indian existence. In Marathi, for instance, we have the traditions of Gondar and Tamasha, basically Lokanatya, which are absolutely culturally specific, culturally defined. You have in Chhattisgarh, for instance, the other kind of tradition, folk theatre. Now, to give you one example of Kon Manto Takkadila, this is a play by Sanjay Pawar and talks about a very funny situation where the government, in its attempt to uh, bring about caste equality, comes up with an ordinance and says that every middle class, upper caste family has to adopt a Dalit as part of their family. And what chaos this creates, and in the process, Sanjay Pawar goes on to debunk lots of myths in our minds about what is a Dalit, what is an upper caste, what is Brahmin, what is non-Brahmin, what is the meaning of history for some, for the ultra right, what is the meaning of history for people coming from down there. And it in Marathi it really raged because it was a very hilarious play, and it was located in the tradition of Lokanatya as well as the drawing room comedy. Now my problem when I translated this play into English, one reason was that as a theatre goer, I thought this is a fantastic theatre experience, and I have to take it into English to people, at least to because see, when we translate these such plays like Jayan Pawar Sadhantar or Konmanto Takkadila, which I translated as um, uh, pass the buck on brother. So it's not me who will do it; it's she who will do it. They will do it. So don't take any responsibility, just pass on. Now, my problem was there is no Indian English theatre into which I translate this play. Because theatre is basically performability, acting, playability. And who's going to do this play? I mean, am I translating for merely reading? And half of the fun of the theatre, the very interesting theatre of this play diminishes, disappears. Now, I don't know anybody who would like to do that in English, because see, any translation that you make ultimately has to have a Ranga Samhita, a Ranga Vritti. Before performance, before staging it, one has the text has to go through multiple changes. Now, who's going to make a Ranga Vritti of this play? Because I've translated this all right. The same problem came with uh, Adhantar, which I have translated as the nowhere people. This is based on, like Sakina Manzil, it brings alive Mumbai. And it's based on the fizzling out of the textile mill workers strike. And it has very interesting characters who are basically migrants from Konkan region into Mumbai, middle class families, lower middle class families, and the inevitable disintegration of these family relationships. Uh, Family as a unit itself, completely disintegration, then lumpenization, politics. It's making a very, very major statement on Mumbai and on a lot of things. It's a cultural history. It's a document of what happened in Mumbai at that time. Now, Ramu Ramanathan's play also, Mahadev Bhai, brings alive the Indian context. In the case of Mahadev Bhai, but that context is uniformly almost the same all over India, where people believed in Gandhiji's principles, people believed in whatever he did, etc. It's an account of and takes into account quite a few interesting points for discussion, but there is a basic ground for understanding which is constant, which is cohesive, coherent, that gives the play its own space, tightness. It doesn't happen like that in Adhantar, or it doesn't happen like that in Another Dalit play that I translate, I'm just telling you about the problems, because this issue of spectatorship or readership, who do you privilege when you are translating? When I translate, I basically translate it to be performed. But my problem is I am not part of the English theatre. I'm not part of the metropolitan theatre, English theatre. I may have done plays all over Maharashtra, but that's not it. And when I translate something like, say, Datta Bhagat's Vata Padvata, it traces the history of the Dalit movement through 3 generations of Dalits, and the whole play is a variant of the form of discussion theatre. It's a discussion play. Now, how do you reach out this discussion? And though it's a discussion play, it's basically based on students, the caste element, the hatred of castes for each other, uh, that kind of, the way a small village is torn apart by caste conflicts. And then the love between an upper caste lower caste man, woman. So it deals with very volatile kind of experiences, and it documents the entire history through the play of the Dalit movement. Now, one who's not familiar with the history of the Dalit movement, one who's not familiar with the nuances of changes that took place over the Dalit movement, uh, it's different political stances that were taken at different times, right from the time when Dr. Ambedkar started his movement, to the time where people like Athole, for instance, left the path and went in a slightly right history, one may say. They could be different interpretations of this. But for a person who doesn't know this history as theatre, how because in the play the theater and the cultural history, the political history are fused in such a form that the performability becomes very important. Now my problem is, how do I bring it out in English? Translating that into Marathi is no problem. Any English play into Marathi is no problem, because the significant problem here is the hierarchical relationship between languages. If I translate something into English, and if I translate something into Marathi, there is a world of difference between the two, because English and Marathi are in a hierarchical relationship of power. English theatre and regional theatres are also in hierarchical relationships of power, probably. Okay, so how do I reach this kind of Marathi theatre? And I'm very proud of that, because, because I basically believe that translation is a political activity, not party politics, but it's a cultural political activity. We are trying to conscientize people to several alternative visions of what is happening in society beyond the precincts of your own comfortable, cozy existence. So my problem is, then what do I do with these texts? I want to translate them, and I have translated two more plays. One is the Shivaji Underground in the Bhimnagar Mohalla. Another extremely interesting play, and I loved it because there is a lot of music in it, and I love translating songs. I love writing songs in Marathi and translating them into English. But I don't know how to bring that about in English with, the kind of povadas and launis and that sort of entire musical culture, the entire musical tradition that we have, very rich tradition. And it's the whole play is woven through music. So it has kirtan also. So how do I bring in all these forms alive in a language which doesn't have caste? English has Gandhiji. English has middle classes, higher classes, upper classes. English has religion, everything. English doesn't have caste. Now, my problem is, how do I translate caste into a language which doesn't have it? I created it. I create that world in English. But then the problem is, though the play is immensely playable and performable, who's going to do it? So then I sometimes feel that when I'm doing it in Marathi, any English play, like Dari of Four, for instance, I did two of his plays in Marathi, and my group Pratyay in Kolhapur, we staged them also, and they were very popular, like Mahadev Bhai. But I had to entirely, create a different kinds of performativity context. I took the form of the Lokanatya and a political play, which we have a strong tradition in Marathi. So, the issue is that if you want to take Indian regional theatre into English of people who are not really in the positions of power, because Dalits are not in the position of power, and if you want to take their articulations into English, who are you translating for? And though I would love to see somebody perform these plays, change them, whatever, somebody should at least try, but it doesn't happen. It becomes a closet reading. And that for me is one of the major failures that translators like me, I'm not talking about the quality or anything else, I'm talking about the very lack of opportunity for taking it on the stage to audiences of various kinds. And there, because without the gaistic dimensions, which are not there, the play can't be a play. Marathi has that gaistic dimension, the plays, but I don't know whether English has that to produce a play on caste. Now, these are the problems. What dialect do I use? How do I recreate that sense of Mumbai, for instance, that sense of Maharwada, for instance, the sense of a small downtown college, for instance, where all these conflicts come up and play around, all the political forces that impede participation of Dalits into all this. And again, in Marathi we have a very strong tradition of Dalit theatre. Unfortunately, in English it doesn't seem to be there. So now my problem is that I am writing in the dark. It's a step in the dark. I don't know what's out there. I know how it's going to be received, even as spectators, even as readers. So these are some of my preoccupations with, doing Dalit theatre in translation. So doing is just translating, of course. Uh, so I hope a day comes when somebody takes up these plays and says, okay, let us try to do Dalit theatre in English.
Thanks, Maya. I mean, you're absolutely right to say that there is indeed a lot of history when it comes to Dalit writing. And in that writing is embodied resistance, yes, there's anger, and there's a whole plethora of caste relations, uh, which, if not understood, and if you're not familiar with that history, or if you wouldn't want to try and dig deeper, one way it could be done is you preface the play. But even then, in terms of language, how do you actually communicate these nuances and these subtexts? So hopefully we can talk about that too in our discussion. And let me invite now our last speaker, Mr. Mahesh Dattani. Mr. Dattani, you are very famous. Uh, you don't need an introduction, and I was happy to learn that your plays have been translated into Japanese and German as well now, along with in various other Indian languages, whether it's Odia, Bangla, Hindi, Marathi, Gujarati, of course, and even Nepalese. So you will be talking about that, and you'll also be talking. You shared your own experiences very briefly with me of adapting Lorca and Shakespeare in translation to the stage. So yes, Mahesh.
Yes, thank you, Deepa. Thank you for that very generous introduction. And I just want to say, if I were that famous, why aren't these famous translators translating my plays? So maybe have yet to get there. But before I talk about what I intended to talk about, I would like to respond to Maya Pandit and say, please, I, as the artistic director of Playpen, am very, very interested to read your translations of Dalit theatre, because this is, I think you said something which I would like to challenge. You said that there is no caste in English, in the English language. I would like to disagree and say there is caste in Indian English, at least, because a person no less than Ramu Ramanathan introduced me. Of course, it was half in jest, where he introduced me as the first writer from a trading class background to write in English. So, it's there, right? But I do concede on your point as to the subtleties which you talk about culture. From a subaltern, how do you translate that? But I think that is the education. That's part of the education that theatre is very much in the forefront of. Today you go to Broadway and you see a music like Hamilton, which is about the constitution of that country, but said spoken in rap by non-white actors, right? So there are all these Puerto Rican actors who are enacting parts that were originally, the characters were all white. And so there's so many ways that theater can overlap and overcome these sort of cultural walls. I'm going to just, Deepa, I'm just going to take it a little earlier because you did mention the Japanese thing. Is that this is about 20 years ago when I was invited by the Japan Foundation as part of an exchange program. And they had suggested it might be a good idea to do one of my plays while I'm there for a small group. And so I was very excited and I was looking forward to that. And, the performance began and it was in Buto style, in this very sort of esoteric Japanese dance form. And there were these very intense moments, of stillness and great power as if something is going to happen, but nothing big or dramatic happens. And I was just waiting for my play to begin. And after that was over, they invited me for the Q&A. And when I heard the translations, I realized that that was my play, which they'd done. What they'd done was they took the chorus, all the words out of the chorus. They did not translate it to Japanese, but they translated it to Buto movement. And from the questions that were coming in, I could see that somehow the essence of my work, it was more about the insider and the outsider. And they'd removed almost 99% of the context of the play. This is Final Solutions, which is a play on, the Hindu-Muslim conflict. There was no word of Hindus and Muslims, and still there was this very interesting discussion on insiders and outsiders. So I think for me, this was most flattering that this was completely took me by surprise, this translation. And the fact that somehow something did get translated and something was dropped, which seemed completely inconsequential to the audiences there. I think that was a wonderful move because ultimately you serve the target and not the origin when it comes to translation. And to me, this was a very good example. Now, coming to my own experiences as a director, working with plays that I wanted to translate. There came a point where I was completely fed up of this label that I had of an Indian English playwright. And I was very keen to direct plays not in English. And the first attempt was with the Madhya Pradesh students, School of Drama students. And I was invited to direct a play. And I thought it would be very nice to do a Midsummer Night's Dream, but in dialect, because I was in touch, I was on the advisory panel, so I knew what the students were doing, the kind of research that they were doing. And they'd just been on a field trip to Chhattisgarh to spend some time in certain tribal areas in Bastar, right? So they were studying cultures. And I thought it would be a good proposal to say, why don't we look at this play completely from the perspective of the culture that you've just studied, and of whom I have absolutely no knowledge of, right? It's not my experience, but the experience that the actors had just been through. And they came up with improvs, and they came up with, and we had a designer who was from that region, who had studied set design. And he came up with some ideas as to how to make this sort of almost like a hut made of bamboo, and that became a set piece, and so on and so forth. And ultimately, it was wonderful because what transpired was that the Athenians in the play, the lovers and the king and the queen, all became the indigenous people of Bastar, and the charmed forest became this concrete jungle that they run away and come to the city. And you had the fairy king and queen who are, at loggerheads with one another as these reality show actors and actors recently divorced and can't stand each other, and how their fight is somehow being generated by the media and stuff. So all this came about. Now, you may call it adaptation, you may call it transcreation, whatever, but I think at every stage of theater is a translation. And I went to look at the original meaning of translation, and the etymology says something very beautiful. And I think you could use this poetically. And going by what Naveen said about listening, and what Jayashree said about the being a good reader, that sort of got me thinking about this. Is that the original meaning is the transfer of a saint's body or relics from one place to another. That's what translation really means, right? So to come to the question which Subhendu Sarkar also asked is that what are the parameters? What is a translation? What are we looking at? I think if somewhere this soul gets relocated in this, it's a translation. So if you're looking at the original work as a relic, but still sacrosanct, right? That is the most precious thing, which you then remove, because translation, again, the original meaning has to do with removal. That if you remove it to another place, the architecture may change, the surroundings may change, right? But the fact is that the essence, which is the relic of the saint, which is sacrosanct, finds another place to rest in. So, I'm not sure I want to go too much into Lorca, because it'll be nice to spend some time with Q&A. But I'll just sort of mention briefly that one of the things that really sort of stayed with me when I was doing Lorca in Hindi was his essay on what he called duende. Duende is this very earthly spirit, and it's very similar to what Abhinav Gupta calls the Dwani theory of the power of suggestion, that rasa is not really generated by the actor, but it is manifested somehow in the experience, and so received by the audience. That this thing that cannot be seen, that cannot be described, but yet can move from place to place. And I think that is the magic, and that is the art of translation that we're all engaged in. So I'll end there, so give you some time.
Thanks, Manish. In fact, when you were talking about A Midsummer's Night Dream, I was reminded of Habib Tanvir's production, beautiful production, a beautiful musical production of the play, and to connect that to what Maya was saying earlier about that. How do you translate the music? How do you translate the folk rhythms? And in English certainly it seems more difficult, and probably more in other Indian languages it may be more possible to do it because of, in that sense, some shared musicality. Also, before I open this up to all of you, because I don't need to be asking all the questions. I would be very happy for the questions to come from you to each other as well. I just want to go back to what Subhendu said about Michael Madhusudan Dutt. You gave that example, and I was thinking that of that particular time of his translation of his own work, which he probably wanted to for a very, very English audience, and where I think he would have very consciously decided why he would want to alter that translation. And with these choices also, when we talk about choices that translators perhaps now having moved from that colonial phase and actually translating for a lot many other Indian languages and for the stage, if you want to adapt it eventually, is at one level, because theater has its own language. In any case, when a play comes to the theater, it goes through its own interpretation and design language. When it comes to a translated text, uh, are you going to further work on it in terms of adapting it? Are you going to be sticking to the translated text itself? Uh, how are you going to continue to connect in terms of what the ethos of the original text is in translation? And would you really want to make changes and in that sense not be loyal to the text? So that's just a broad observation, really. Since you raised an example, I'm sorry, I'm hearing some background sound. I don't know where it is coming from. Would you just like to check on that? There is some background sound that is coming in. Yeah, it seems all right now. Yes, so please ask each other questions. I don't need to be posing these questions myself before we take the questions from the audience. We have, I think, 10 more minutes here.
I just want to make an observation, like when Maya talked about the the Gondul tradition and the Lavani, and how do you bring that to a non-Marathi stage? Because were you to do it in Bengali, you would probably have a similar sort of challenge. Very interestingly, I had done an adaptation of The Cherry Orchard with the Film and Television Institute, and we adapted The Cherry Orchard to an Aam Ka Bagicha in Ratnagiri, and the Jewish band, which is supposed to come in Act 3, we changed that to the Gondol. And we had these Tulzapuri songs, which were just amazing. And the actors, again, had this opportunity to study them. And we had someone actually come and teach them. And it was a wonderful learning experience for everyone.
Could I respond to no? Could I respond to that, Deepa?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, see, that's exactly what I'm saying. See, if you do something from English into our languages, whether it's Marathi or Bengali, you have a plethora of alternatives available to you. Yeah, so you could easily use Gondal in the form of Gondal in a different kind of language. But my problem is, how do I take it into English? Because I can't use any, I'm not very much familiar with the Western kind of music or rap or, whatever other forms there are, pop and stuff. But how do I use that? I mean, suppose I take help from somebody, but the kind of things that cultural connotations, because, you in a play, you have an ear that listens and an eye that sees underneath and a body that performs all this. Now, that's all absent, especially in music, bringing out this music into English. Now, translating the words is not a problem. Putting that to music in English is a problem. Otherwise, I don't know if somebody could try this out, but using different kinds of Indian rhythms and Indian ragas and Indian, because we have ragas based on folk music. Kumar Gandharva is a whole tradition. So if somebody can do that, I don't know. But, because half of the beauty of Shivaji in Underground in Neemnagar Mohalla is in the music and the songs. There is a story, of course.
Yes. I think Naveen has a response. Sorry, Mahesh.
Oh, just a little thought, because I think, Maya, you've sorted it out already by suggesting that, which is what I was going to say, which is it's perfectly all right in today's world, where we are in and out of each other's lives, humors, cultures. There's, of course, the written text, as Subhendu said, which is, what is it for? To be read as literature. That's one level of reading. But in the performative sense, it would be fantastic to just go smoothly from one English prose sequence into the traditional folk music of Chhattisgarh, for example. It's okay. I mean, it's the same way that I am kind of personally now, for many years, we don't do glossaries of the kind that explain everything. Because in today's world of technology and being able to research and Google and all of that rubbish, it's okay for readers to do a little homework and find, what Lavani is, for example. Let them do it. It's okay. It's these liberties is exactly what each one of you has said in different ways about translation. As the essence, as Mahesh said, the soul needs to be captured. It's perfectly all right. And for us, for example, we were paying two sets of people. You paid a translator, then you paid somebody else who was of equal stature. And if you were lucky and the playwright was alive, you had three checks and balances, and even then you screwed up, right? In the sense that you still couldn't achieve your sense of what was perfect. And this became even more complicated in a country where, as you said, there are just so many different languages, traditions, and we don't know them. Hierarchies you were talking of, it's just the half a dozen languages that we play around with. And I've discovered when I'm doing the European languages, first-time writers who sell in debut presentations, novels, 20,000 copies in German, are desperate to be published in English, even though they know the worldwide they will sell 600 copies. It is this hierarchy that we speak about. But really, thank you very much. That was very nice, Maya. Thank you.
Yeah. Also, I think one way, and when we talk about the genre of Indian English theatre, for instance, and we're looking at also using words from other languages very freely, and think of actually keeping these songs in the original along with the translations. But these are choices that even a director could consciously make, that you decide that I will translate the rest of the play, but when it comes to the music and the songs, maybe I'd like to present them in the original.
Absolutely.
All right. Sorry. Yes,
can I say something?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about the word adaptation and the kind of liberties a translator takes at times. The translator can actually kill the original play or cause sincere damage to the play. For example, I remember GPD talking about the systematic destruction of Brecht on Indian stage. For example, the Three Penny Opera, which has been translated into Marathi as Teen Paishacha Tamasha by none less than Pula Deshpande, but it has defeated the purpose of Brecht. Brecht reached India through such translations, and you can't recognize Brecht again in that play because it was entertainment pure and all kind of, one was tempted, the translator was tempted to put in every element that he knew about entertainment on stage and Lavani. It was a wonderful production, but it was an independent play. So one has to be careful with that kind of interact. Even Vinda Karandikar, who has translated Faust, he has sent a disclaimer in the foreword itself that I have translated it based on the English translation. So again, that we haven't tackled that point, translating a foreign language play or foreign language literature from English, so via media. So how much is lost in this two-way process? But maybe that is the next.
In fact, I think Naveen and Subhendu would be also, I think, some of the right people to talk about this, is because Bengali theatre has seen a lot of translation of European plays into Bangla.
Yeah. Also Teen Paisha,
Very important place. I'm sorry, I need to at least take a couple of questions from the audience since we're running out of time. Okay, so Abhishek Majumdar is asking, can you please talk about one instance in which you had to work hard at translating a metaphor? And then in brackets, he says, not a verb or an object. And how did you solve it? Okay, so that's one question. I don't know whom is it directed to. That's not clear. And then he also asked that when you translate a poem within the play, say a Kannad or a Kambar, what changes in the process? I don't know. Who would like to take this?
I could talk about Bodas the Sangre Blood Wedding, which was translated to Raktera, is that the metaphor of the colors are all metaphoric in that. So the white of the bride had to be translated to red, of the bride, because white means mourning. And Lorca is very, very specific of the use of colors. So I guess that could be one example. I don't know whether that qualifies as a metaphor. But we had several, I didn't do the translation. Abhinav Grover did the translation and he did a superb job of it. But there were several instances where, the metaphor was changed with the intention of retaining the essence or the soul of what we assume is the original, because again, we translated from the English version, and we chose a translation which was actually written by someone who lived in Grenada in the same area which Lorca had set his plays in. So it wasn't an official translation as such, but a rough translation of that.
Okay, there's one question from
I
Krishna
would,
D. Who's
answer
asked,
that as well.
sorry. Yes, Subhendu?
Yes. I don't know whether this can again qualify as a metaphor, but I'm reminded of one such example that I came across while translating Adil Sarkar's Bogola Chorit Manush. I translated the title is like this, Life of Bogola, because you see Chorit Manush, that of course would have an allusion to Tulsidasa's work. So I had mentioned this in the footnote, but couldn't dare to retain that in the title. But I'm reminded of one instance. There was this phrase, Kurukhetro Badhabo in Bangla. Now, in such cases, you see, Kurukshetra would be something, this idiom would be familiar to the Indians, but while translating it into English, I preferred an equivalent in English. I searched for an idiom, and the one I ultimately decided to retain is, I will raise hell. So Kurukshetra Badhavo is, it would create pandemonium, like that. So I have retained the sense. So this can be one approach. This is an example of not literal, but literary translation. Now, the point that I had made, it is up to the translator. One has to resolve these issues that comes across. No one is going to help us.
Absolutely. It's also to do with, which you already talked about, the approach that a translator takes. So when Jayashree talked about Teen Sakina Manzil, when she could have chosen the Marathi, the kind of Marathi that she wanted to use for that translation. Or when Maya chooses to translate a Dalit play, what English words is she going to use? So these are the choices that translators make, also in terms of what kind of ethos of the text that you want to come, the ethos that needs to come across ultimately to the viewer or to the reader. I am so sorry, Trishita, I'm sorry that I'm not able to address your question. I'm not able to address other questions as well because we are out of time. So sorry about that. Just to close, I want to say thank you to all of you for participating in this panel, and thank you, Meta, for proposing what I think is a very, very important subject. I mean, without translations, I can't think of our theatre existing for what it is, and yet translation does not often seem to get its due. And we need to have more and more conversations about this. Also, why should we not be translating more for the theatre?
Thank you, Meta, for putting theatre translation firmly on the map. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meta and Deepa and everybody else on this panel. This was good. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Judith, we are good to go?
Thank you, Jayashree Joshi, Mahesh Dattani, Maya Pandit, Naveen Kishore, and Subhendu Sarkar for such an incredible session and for giving our viewers such great insights into translations and some of the finest translators. And thank you, Deepa, for being a fabulous moderator.
I had very good panelists.
Once again, we would like to thank for their unstinted support for the arts Thank you all for watching and being a great audience. If you like this meta dialogue, do subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the notifications of our upcoming events. All these meta dialogues will be available to view on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. We hope you will stay tuned to watch our final meta dialogue for today, Theatre Resurgence in Digital Platforms, with Anil Makhija, Anurupa Roy, Rajat Kapoor, and Shreyas Talpade in a session moderated by Yuki Elias at 6 p.m. Thank you once again and see you soon. Till then, stay home, stay safe, stay masked, and good evening.
Bye.